us, eating snails may seem like an odd thing, but in all fairness, many cultures around the world eat gastropods, that is, stomach feet. We don't recognize this because we don't think of these conchs as snails, but they are, and they live in the sea.
Early humans that came into the littoral zones found these easy pickings for quick meal. The problem was how to get inside the seashell. Well, they would shatter it, break it open some way, but once they did that, it revealed a very finely crafted structure, and it's a pity to destroy such a thing. Eventually somebody figured out that if you poke a hole deep in the spiral part, you could blow the inhabitants out. You'd have your meal, and you would mostly preserve a very handsome vessel that you could use for various things. Some shells naturally have parasite holes from worms that could have given people ideas on how to penetrate the shell. One way of making an opening without the use of impact forces is to use one of these. Came from 2,300 miles that direction 6 months ago when a volcanic eruption sent millions of these into the sea. And according to the park rangers, they said that it floated its way through the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico to these shores. You can imagine a few hundred years ago a native to these shores finding a shell and finding very conveniently one of these. They couldn't have known when these would arrive. It's a random event. But you better believe that if they found it, they knew what it was good for. And one of the things they could have done was created a nice controlled opening without damaging the shell. These pumice stones are still useful today in industry and in our homes. Louis Stout posited that when blowing through a shell for the first time, you would approach the suspicious opening with stiffened lips cautiously, and in so doing, in blasting the air through, maybe create that lip buzz, characteristic of all lip-blown instruments or brass instruments. Get that. If you cultivate that, maybe you have something like this. There you have the sound of conch shell. The Triton, or Moragi as the Shinto Japanese monks call it, has a very warm and impressive tone. The Yamabushi regard that tone highly as an atonement of two divergent spaces, the sound of the ocean bottom while performed on mountaintops. Buddhist monks that arrived in Japan initially brought with them their tradition of conch shell playing, which led to a syncretism with Shintoism. That means the two religions easily coincided with each other. The Shintos were already using conch shells. Buddhists brought the conch shell tradition with them, and they in turn had inherited their traditions of the shell from Hinduism.
It is common for a lead pipe to be affixed to the opening. In landlocked Tibet, the Buddhist monks traded for conch shells, dung dakar as they called them, preferring the white shells which were associated with the priestly class. Other colors, like red and brown, were associated with the warrior class and the merchant class, respectively.
The yellow helmet is very common in the Pacific Ocean, and it predominates the Polynesian culture. In Hawaii, they call this a pu, which has an obvious onomatopoeia quality to it, in as much as it tells you how to play it. Pu, pu, pu. The Pacific cultures would use this to signal the beginning of rituals, communication, and also sounding alarms for warfare. In today's culture, we associate the signaling of this device as a summons for people. In fact, in the story, Lord of the Flies, the person who has the shell has the power to summon everyone. With the destruction of the shell, we have an end to social cohesiveness and also an end to civil ritualized behavior. The Hawaiian legislature today initiates their sessions not with a gavel, which you strike as you normally would in a courtroom, but instead with this. This little shell is quite loud because of its size. It has a more pronounced conical ratio and therefore generates a little more volume. It's called a pink helmet, or sometimes the queen helmet, hailing from the Atlantic Ocean. It is often a favorite size for professional conch shell players because you're able to do pitch variations on it that are not as easy on others. The Syrinx is the largest of the conch shells and the heaviest. We don't know much about this guy. They were utilized by the Aboriginal Australians, and now we know that we can't seem to find these along the coast of Australia anymore. They were quite big. The largest one ever discovered was 38 inches, which is, this is 20 inches, is about twice the length of this, if you can imagine. And we don't know what they did in their lifetimes. I think they had a long proboscis or tongue. What they ate, what they did with their lives, we don't know. This is a great opportunity for an aspiring marine biologist to figure out what's the deal with these guys. The lightning whelk is a little unique from the others. In fact, on the family tree, it's a little bit removed from the rest of the conch shells. One of its most interesting qualities, as its Linnaean name suggests, is it's backwards. It spins the other direction. Let me give you an example here. You have a horn, a normal French horn. You grab it by the hand and you put your right hand in the bell. But with this lightning whelk, you'd have to grab it with the right hand and put your left hand in the bell. So it is backwards. Now, it's backwards from the others. This is important in Hinduism and Buddhism because it is a sacred direction, the curls of Buddha, various other things about it. And I know that if you find one of those other shells that goes the opposite direction, it's so rare, the asking price is about $1 million for those. But don't go into a gift shop and see one of these and get excited seeing it for $30, imagining you're $1 million profit. No, these naturally go this direction, but they were unknown to Buddhists and Hindus because these were only found in the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean. It is also noteworthy that it is the state seashell for Texas, and I'm sure there's something about this going the opposite direction of the others and Texas, something about that, sure. Before concluding this section about seashells, I wanted to mention something about this image that you see before every episode. And I didn't get to mention it in the previous one regarding motivation, and it is a very motivating thing for me. Back in the early 90s when I was in the Air Force Band touring, we stopped in Ashland, Oregon, and ran across some folks in the Rogue Valley Horn Society. One member in particular was also a member of the South Oregon Photographic Society. She was losing her eyesight, sadly, at the time, but she had taken this picture of her horn and gave it to me. In part of our discussions, I mentioned how I wanted to become a college professor and so forth. And she said, well, hang this in your office. And it took a few years before I had one, but I eventually did get to hang it up in an office. And so it has been a motivating thing for me. Evolution of a design. Well, I think the connectivity between a nautilus shell and a Yamaha horn, that was her horn by the way, is a little abstruse. You can't deny that a connection exists. And I hope you see that in everything that I discuss here. There are connectivities between all the things that I discuss. So, in the next episode, I will talk about cultures and the horn, and I hope you will see them next. This is a seashell, like really a sea.